Hi everyone, welcome to week 7 of English97. I know I always say this, but I am going to give you a quick video to go over just reflecting on Essay 1 and then some reminders about conferences this week. I'm also going to talk about the end of semester portfolio. Now that we're wrapping up our first essay, I want to kind of talk a little bit more about what that portfolio will look like, what's included, and then how I am going to help you sort of grade your first essay to make sure that it's good enough for your portfolio. So let's go ahead and get started. So assignments for this week, please sign up for and attend your second conference. These are required as part of the course, and the sign up is linked in the end of the PowerPoint, also on Blackboard. If those times don't work for you, please email me and we will find a time that does. Okay, so those are based on my schedule, but if you're like, hey, I only have time on Saturday at 10 a.m., send me an email and we'll get it set up. All right, so otherwise, you do have readings this week. Use What Works Chapter 2, and then the Student Guide to the Portfolio Chapter 1. So I will show you where that's at on Blackboard under our other readings, and then you'll have a quiz on those. Discussion board this week is very simple, just a reflection about Essay 1, kind of get you thinking about, that portfolio. And then there will be an opportunity for extra credit with our second journal, but it's not required. That is not required. So let's go to where the readings are. So if you go under our course and then to UWW and other readings, you will see our textbook, of course, and then below that is a folder titled Other Readings and then one titled Student Guide to the Portfolio. The Student Guide to the Portfolio is a book that was written by the English department at SWIC, kind of explaining the portfolio process. So the chapter I'd love for you all to read this week is Chapter 1. It's very short, simple, kind of just goes over the process and what you should, look out for. So that's where you will find that. Let me get back to my PowerPoint. Other things I wanted to point out, I did make some changes to our schedule that I hope will be good and maybe take a little bit of the weight off of the course for you all. So we are currently in week 7 here. We're doing conference number 2 and then reflecting on Essay 1. Next week, week 8, we will start Essay 2. And what you'll notice is that I cut one of the essays from our course. So we are only going to do 2 essays total, plus the cover letter for your portfolio. Okay, so another thing that you'll see is at the end of week 13, at this point, we will have done both essays, revised and edited, and we'll have worked on your cover letters. At this point, if I feel that your writing is where it needs to be, and you've got both essays and your cover letter finished and ready to go, then you are done. I'll turn in the portfolio at the end of the semester for you, and you can wait for your results. But if you need more time to revise or develop your essays, which some of you may, I know the semester really gets kind of crazy and you might need more time, this will give us just some wiggle room, So say we get to week 14 and you're like, actually, I think I could really do a little more work on Essay 1, then you have time to do that. So this I will also post on Blackboard in our course, and I encourage you to look it over. Don't forget, in a couple weeks we have spring break and won't have any class that week. So the other thing I wanted to talk about today are some ideas from your readings. So use What Works Chapter 2. I know I'm kind of jumping around in the textbook, but I do have a method to my madness. So this chapter talks about really just the role that writing can play not only in college for you, but in other areas of your life. And it also starts to talk about something called rhetoric, which is a term that you'll encounter if you take English 101 or 102. But this chapter talks about not just having a topic and a thesis, but having a purpose in an audience or a reader that you're writing to. And this is what rhetoric is all about. So in this early stages of the writing process, like we did with Essay 1, you might not be thinking about who you're writing to as much as what you're writing. But at this point, when we start Essay 2 next week, I want you to be thinking about who specifically you are writing to. And that can change. So some of you may be like, well, I'm writing to you, obviously, you're my teacher. But that may not always be the case. You kind of can give yourself the room to say, ideally, who would be reading this? And how am I appealing to that person? So that also talked about in this chapter is rhetoric and the rhetorical triangle. So from your textbook, it says rhetoric is the study and practice of using language, your words, to communicate with an audience for some purpose. Talks also about this rhetorical triangle, which is essentially the relationship between you, your reader, and why you're writing. I also have this example here. Many of you will hopefully recognize Martin Luther King Jr. in this image, and then his I Have a Dream speech. And this is also a good example of the rhetorical triangle. The author being Martin Luther King Jr., the audience being the people that he was speaking to in Washington, D.C. during this speech, and then the purpose to demand racial equality. So you can understand, hopefully, from this example that if you change, the audience you're speaking to, why you're speaking, or who is doing the speaking, then the actual words, the language will change. And this is something we talked a little bit about last week when we talked about standard English and whether that's always appropriate. So once you have an understanding of rhetoric, I want you to kind of think about it in terms of your first essay. So I gave you the topic for essay 1, and I told you this is your purpose, to write about an event in the past that you would love to repeat or wouldn't want to repeat for even $1 million. I wanted you to share your story and then to inform your reader of why it was impactful. The writer was you, and then your reader, we didn't really talk about who your audience is. Is it me? Is it other students in the course? Maybe someone who's experienced something similar? So if you haven't thought about who your audience is, now would be a good time as you're kind of looking back at your essay. Say I wrote about the car accident that I was in a few years ago. I think that if I was writing about this now, ideally I would be writing to someone who has not experienced something that traumatic and maybe encourage them to, think about how difficult recovery from something like that can be and how the kind of, care that you can give to someone who's experienced something like that. So that's kind of what I want you to do this week. Just think about how your essay talked about this idea of rhetoric. And then the last thing I want to talk about is our end of semester portfolio. So now that I've cut our semester down to only 2 essays instead of 3, your portfolio will include those 2 essays, essay 1 in the past, and then essay 2, which will start next week, and then a cover letter, which we will begin after we finish essay 2. I believe it'll be around week 12. So when you think about the rhetorical triangle of your portfolio, you've got you, the writer, the English department is the reader of your portfolio, and then your purpose is to use these essays and your writing to say, hey, I'm ready for college level courses. I'm ready for situations that will ask me to write college level writing. Okay, so as you're writing these essays, I want you to think not only about your ideal audience, ideally the person you're writing to, but then at the end of the semester, the people who will read these, which will be other English faculty like me. So the intro to the portfolio chapter I'm asking you all to read this week also talks about how the portfolio essays are evaluated, how they're graded. And this is something we'll talk about in conferences. So there are 6 categories that we use to evaluate the portfolios. The first 5 apply to your essays. So these are discussed in that intro to the portfolio chapter. And they pretty much just go over, purposeful development, meaning do you have a purpose and are you able to support it with examples? The writing situation, this has to do with rhetoric. Do you understand your audience, your topic, and your thesis? Thought, do you make the reader think about your topic? Do you kind of approach it from an interesting place? Order talks about, is the essay organized and kind of clear to understand? Language, are the sentences clear? How correct are the mechanics? So this has to do with editing. And then finally, the last piece is your cover letter. We'll get to this more later in the semester, but how aware are you of, how you write, and then of the strengths and weaknesses that you have as a writer? We are doing all of this throughout both essays and the cover letter, but I wanted to just kind of talk about this in a little bit more detail this week. So make sure you sign up for our conference. I am really excited to chat about your first essay and talk about, how that might be evaluated in your portfolio. And this is also a great time. We're about midway almost through the semester. This is a really great time to ask questions or ask for help. If you feel like you've kind of fallen behind or you need to catch up, this is a really good week to do that. All right, so I'm looking forward to talking to you guys, and I will see you soon.